Oh, good evening, everybody. It's absolutely incredibly fantastic to stand here in front of a full Routh Hall. We have a wonderful venue here, and it's so fantastic to see all the seats taken. So thank you very much for being here tonight. You're all very welcome, and delighted to have such an amazing turnout. Just to go through a few housekeeping rules, if the fire alarm goes off, which we're not expecting, the emergency exits are at the back for people at the back, and then all marked in green, so to the side here, and then through behind the back on both sides of the stage. If anybody needs the toilet, they're out through these double doors and right and left. So that's the housekeeping. Also like to say a welcome to the people that are on live stream. We've got a great audience of people who are at home tuning in to watch this fantastic presentation and the music. So you're all very welcome, and thank you very much for being here. I'd like to welcome on stage Alastair Moseley, who's going to do this evening's presentation, and also welcome the orchestra. Thank you.
Well, welcome. What a fantastic turnout this actually is. We're all really delighted. I'm sure it's not me you want to know about, though. It's the Droitwich Masts you want to know about. So I'm not taking any credit for this. So what are we going to do today? Well, let's have a little look. So why am I doing this is the big point. So as a lot of you know, as well as being a musician, I'm also a civil engineer. So I'm used to building things in concrete, big roads and things. And I'm now presenting on radio masts where they used to talk about microohms and milliamps, whereas I designed to the nearest foot. So, and by the sounds of some conversations, they're still building houses like that. So, I'm very fortunate with my lovely wife Kathy to live in Checkers Lane, and my office window looks out over the mast, so that picture you can see there is from my window. If you manage to look through all the cables that are dangling in front of it, it's actually quite a nice view. And they look like they're set in parkland. It's fantastic. It almost looks like it should be in a stately home. It's so well maintained. And anyway, so I was really excited about the masts anyway, because I think they're a landmark. They're as much a landmark as they are a broadcasting thing. I think most of us use them to find our way home. As you probably know. But I had to have a new telephone feed put into the house. You can just see it in the top right-hand corner there. And the engineer that came was really excited about the masts, and his name's Paul. And he stayed for far longer than he probably should have done. I dare say Openreach weren't very impressed, because he was probably with me for 2 hours. But he was waxing lyrical about the masts and the fact that they're about to be decommissioned. So I suddenly thought, oh, this is interesting. I'm a member of the Bromsgrove Society with my lovely colleague Joe and the team and Pat. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to do a talk? So I said I wrote a little paper with Pat, and we presented it to the executive. And then they all said, well, why don't you present it? So I thought, oh well, let's beware what you wish for a moment. So I'm going to make no excuses for the fact that I am not a radio engineer, I'm a civil engineer. I'm not going to go into detail about how the masts actually work, although I know a bit about it. So if you do want to ask me some questions later on, I'll be more than happy to try. But I'm going to be talking more about them as a feature of the landscape and also a little bit of their social history. So why have we got an orchestra behind us, you may ask? Who are absolutely amazing, I have to say. The rehearsal last night was wonderful. Well, the very first broadcast from the Masts was on the 6th of September at 3:45. You're going to see that in the presentation in a minute. And the very first thing that came out from the Masts was Eric Coates' Merrymakers, followed by Roger Quilter's English Dances. So we thought, wouldn't it be lovely to actually have the orchestra here and play those very pieces live for you? And so I'm delighted to welcome onto the stage Richard Jenkinson, who is going to be conducting this evening. Richard, would you join me? And my wonderful colleagues from the Orchestra St John. So there's a phrase I'm going to use now, which was the phrase that was used by the engineers as they were communicating with each other on that very day. So Richard Jenkinson, Droitwich calling. While first of all, can I just thank the orchestra, St John? This is Bromsgrove's orchestra. Can you believe that they can play that well? It's wonderful. We should be really proud. What a town we are. So to my surprise, half the orchestra actually want to stay and listen to me talk. I have no idea why they want to do that, but she's really good. I meant to leave this slide up while they were playing, but I forgot. But there's some interesting things in here, particularly the conductor who was Aylmer Best, who was the BBC Symphony Orchestra's first assistant conductor, working alongside some of the great names like Toscanini and all those people. And I just thought you'd like to know. And those pieces were the very first things that came out from the Masts on that day in 6th September 1934. Right. So a few facts and figures. There's an awful lot considering there's just 4 masts there and a lot of cables. There's a big story to tell behind, which I can't possibly do justice to. So in a minute, I'm actually going to show you a little film that was made at the time that the masts were constructed. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of background before I play the film. And that's a technology thing, which hopefully Jamie's around in case I mess everything up. But, as I said, opened on 1934. It was the world's most powerful transmitter at the time. It was called the new giant of the air. This was cutting-edge technology at its best. We get excited about these little phones and things. This was like the mobile phone of its day. It was able to broadcast signals across the whole of the country and into Europe. It was the most powerful of its time. There were other long-wave transmitters around, but none as big as this. It had a good lineage, so obviously back in the 1920s when radio was getting going, we had the British Broadcasting Company, as it was called then. The big technology provider then was Marconi, and they dominated the market right through to the transmitter here. So all the equipment, initially all the transmission equipment was all Marconi. And that also led to a boom in buying Marconi radio sets, apparently. So they obviously did very well out of it. Because obviously that was the way to tune in. And on very early radios, you actually have Droitwich on the dial. So you tune into Droitwich, which is quite exciting. You're going to find out why the site was picked in a minute when you watch the film, but it's a large site. It's 54 acres. As I've said earlier, it looks like a park. It's beautiful. It still looks beautiful even now. I'm sure the trees you can see in it are the same ones that are there now. The 2 masts that were built originally, so what you're going to see in a second, were both the tallest ever built at the time. They were 700 feet tall. They were so tall that when the riggers, or the topmen as they were called, got 2/3 of the way up, they realised they were being underpaid. So they had a dispute with the BBC because they said, look, we've never gone this high before, so we want some more money. So that was an industrial dispute, and they won, and they got their money, which was fantastic. We're going to see some very interesting health and safety stuff going on in this film, and I might just make some comments while I'm talking. But you won't be surprised to know that there was one fatality, but not falling from the masts. It was falling through the big roof in the transmitter hall. Which was obviously tragic. There were 4 people injured and one of them died. But actually, there were 5 people that fell when they were building the roof, and one of them, as he was falling, his overalls got stuck on something. So he never actually hit the ground, so he was protected by his overalls, which is quite amusing, I thought. Very, very powerful transmitter. I'm going to talk about some of that in a little bit. And it took about 18 months to build. So I'm going to, first of all, come out of this. Where's the escape key? Let's do that. And then I'm going to find that. And then hopefully this is going to play. So enjoy. You might not like the music though. So there's a transmitter hall. That's one of the alternators.
Daventry was the pioneer in long-wave broadcasting. But by 1933, Daventry was obsolete. So the BBC decided to build a new long-wave station. An engineer was sent out to find a site. But before the final choice was made, the BBC research department had to come in and carry out extensive tests. A wireless transmitter went, mounted on a lorry, to each proposed site. Small masts were erected beside it and wireless signals sent out. Special vans carrying measuring receivers travelled round the site and noted the strength of the signals on the portable transmitter at various points.
So that house down there is on the A38. And I think it's the Crown. I think it is the Crown pub. Still there, very nice. Just go there for a pint and a nice meal.
The Birmingham area was chosen because it would meet the claims of the south coast and also provide a service for the north of England and Scotland.
I'm sure this is dubbed on. I'm sure this isn't it. At least I got the milliamps right when I was at the start.
These results were carefully worked out and the efficiencies of the sites obtained. This shows the strength contours of the Droitwich site, that is, the areas to which it will give service. It proved to be much the best.
Now here's the first bit of health and safety. You don't use pneumatic tools when there's people working underneath.
In the choosing of a site for a modern broadcasting station, the BBC must make sure that there is a good supply of water. This must be abundant to fill the 300,000-gallon reservoir used for cooling the valve,
I'll tell you more about the
and
reservoir
as
later.
water storage for the station. The 6 transmitting valves used at Droitwich in the final stage of amplification each require an input of 175 horsepower.
That's 135 watts.
Owing to the large amount of power handled by these valves, it is necessary to cool them with water. To do this, a continuous stream of water must circulate round, not only their anodes, but their filament supports.
There's the second health and safety warning. You don't take a barrow off without a guard around it.
The BBC must also consider the subsoil as a conductor of electricity. A soil that is a poor conductor would impede the wireless waves. Again, the position of the masts in relation to neighbouring hills, which might have a similar effect, must also be taken into consideration.
I'll tell you more about this salt in a minute. The walls of the building were 200 millimetres thick, solid stone. That's how well built it was. You can see the A38 down there. And these are the top men working within the tower.
To carry the aerials, 2 700-feet masts were built up, girder upon girder,
There's
200 feet
Church
higher
in the
than
top
any
right-hand
other
corner.
mast previously built by the BBC. Each of these tremendous structures were erected by 4 men known as top men, working on a tiny triangular platform made of planks. As the girders are hoisted to them, they bolt them into place and then move their little platform 1 story higher.
All right, all right, all right. Come on, come on.
In a high wind, this platform may sway as much as 7 feet out of the vertical.
Right.
Now, just watch the very top of the mast when you get there, and you will see there is a man hanging off a rope. Fortunately, not round his neck. There we go. Can you see him? Just
When the masts were nearly finished, it was half an hour's climb for the men coming and going to and from their work each day.
that big rectangle at the top is the pool, with the 300-gallon water pool.
By the end of 1933, the roof began to go on. The joists and the beams went into place, and the building took definite shape.
And this is when those people were
As soon as
injured.
the roof
One
was
died.
finished, It was asphalted
So,
as a protection
just in
against
case you want to
damp.
know, asphalt boils at 525 degrees centigrade. And this guy just can't get over what he's doing. I'm bubbling.
Droitwich has been constructed for a double purpose. It will house the Midland Regional as well as the long-wave national transmitter.
Basically, they still do this now, by the way, but usually with a bit more safety. We still use asphalt on roofs.
As soon as the roof of the building was completed, the plant began to arrive. The diesel engines came first.
I was interested to see here they were delivered in bits and assembled on site, so they didn't come as... They're massive engines, you'll see a picture in a minute. Oh, I've got some pictures as well. Basically, the site didn't have power to it when it was built. All the electricity was generated on site. And if you're interested in English Electric, which was British, became part of General Electric, which is American. Like everything else, we sold the family stuff.
When both the transmitters are in action at Droitwich, they will require an output of nearly 2,000 horsepower from the powerhouse engine. Each of the 4 diesels develops 750 horsepower, so there's always one in reserve. At the same time, the transmitter units were erected and their component parts mounted and connected up.
I've got some pictures of the operating deck you'll see in a few minutes.
Transformers, motor generators, mercury arc rectifiers and switchgear, all of the most modern and up-to-date design, many of them unique, were the outcome of years of research, both by the BBC engineers and by great British engineering firms. When all this plant was in position, Droitwich was ready for testing.
This is the national transmitter at Droitwich testing on a wavelength of 1,500 metres. This is Droitwich testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is Droitwich testing on a wavelength of 1,500 metres. Droitwich testing. This is the national transmitter at Droitwich testing on a wavelength of 1,500 metres.
McClarty here. Skinner, tell whoever's down at the pond to open the water sprays on the valve cooling radiators, will you?
And that's the water jackets around the valves. So the valves get incredibly hot and they have to be cooled.
Right. Oh, and by the way, I'm having another 2 Cat 14 valves mounted in the C units. I want to test the standby gear tonight.
Just look at the quality of everything, all the beautiful glass doors and the polished floors and balustrades. We don't do things like that now, do we?
What's that? Yes. Curd and Drew are below, having a look at the filament motor generators now. Oh, and Skinner, who's in the powerhouse? All right, put Bullock on the switchboard. He can get going when he likes, as I'll want power in about 10 minutes.
Ready for number 3? All ready. Right, let her go.
These engines used to take about 20 minutes to get started.
Stand by to run up the high-tension machine.
I can't help thinking about Star Trek here. Give us all you've got, Scotty.
This is the national programme from London, radiated by the new long-wave transmitter at Droitwich, working on a wavelength of 1,500 metres. Now I'm going to interrupt the news just for a moment to read a gale warning that's just come in.
It's that lovely bucolic scene. And there's the station behind.
That is the end of the programme from the studio tonight, except for dance music. This will be broadcast by the national transmitter at Droitwich and all stations taking.
So, thank you, BBC, for having the foresight to prepare that for us. Isn't that lovely? Right, back to me now. There we go. So, we've just seen the film. Hope you enjoyed that. I did get BFI's permission to do that, so I'm all good. But it is actually available free. So if you want to see that film again, it's, if you go onto the British Film Institute website, it's free to have a look at. So if you're fascinated enough to have another look, please go and have a look. So when it opened on that day, there were 150 guests attended. They were mainly pressmen, so they were obviously, they used to call them pressmen, sorry ladies, in those days. And that was the term, and it was the big event. It was so big that the King George V, was due to attend it, but for some reason that didn't actually happen in the end. I'm not sure why. And there were reception reports from all over the UK, so they were able to receive signals as far as the far north of Scotland, so it was far better than they'd expected. It was originally designed to transmit at 200 kilohertz, which was about 10 times more powerful than any other transmitter that had been seen at the time, but it was actually used at 150. The reason it was at a lower rating was because of interference. When you get a high power signal, it can overwhelm all the other transmitters, so they brought it down. And as you probably know, the radio signals are governed by international laws, so they were working within those boundaries as well. I've got a reference to that a little bit later on. But it was it was featured on the Radio Times, as you can see there, so the latest giant of broadcasting, and in the press it was called the new giant of the air. So I'm just going to quickly tell you something about the masts. I've got an awful lot of information here, which I'll probably forget, but I'll try and get some of it in. So you'll notice on that, that's an aerial photograph of the site. That's been taken since the station was reduced in size, which I shall tell you about a little bit later on. But you'll see there's two masts there, A and B. Those are the original 700-foot masts that were built in 1934, and they are the long wave transmitters, and the B mast is also a medium wave transmitter. Then after all the reorganisation that happened with radio waves and radio signalling and bandwidths, two more masts were built in 1984. So that's the two little ones. So when you drive past the masts on the A38, you'll notice there's two massive masts and two not so big masts. And then the two little ones are the medium wave transmitters. I should say they're not the transmitters, they are the aerials. The transmitters are the equipment that's inside that building in the middle. So those towers are essentially aerials or antenna. So there are two other masts on the site which you may notice. Both of them are actually telecommunications, so they're nothing to do with the site, but they're on the site. So don't be confused by the other masts, as you can see. Those four masts are the main ones. So a bit of detail on the masts. In its heyday, when the building was running early back in the 1930s and 40s, it had a wonderful big plaque on the gate going up there, and that's preserved in the Droitwich Heritage Museum, which I'll tell you about a little bit later on as well. It's all happening later on. I thought you might like to see a picture of somebody climbing up. They don't use the lifts anymore on the masts. They now climb. So the riggers have to climb up that ladder, and it does take getting on for half an hour to climb up to the top, presumably having a breather on the way up. Although notice there aren't any landings, so I don't think I fancy doing that. The little picture on the right, you'll all know that at night they've got lovely lights on, which you can see from miles and miles away. It's one of the things that draws us home, isn't it? I just thought you might like to see one of those close up. So there we go, that's on the right-hand side. And some of the detail that you can't see when you're going past them is you may have noticed that these T-bars that are up in the air, the main aerial is actually the wires that are suspended between those two masts. And they serve different functions, which I'm not qualified to tell you about, but I can tell you that that's how they work. But I met yesterday, I was very fortunate to meet the last operator of the site before he retired, and I hadn't realised that the actual structures, the towers themselves, are also part of the antenna. So the whole thing is live. And we're talking about huge electrical conductivity going on here. So it really is quite lethal if anything shorts out. So the other thing just to notice, you probably noticed when you're looking at the masts, you can see these little nodules on the stays that hold them up, of which there are several. Those stays are there to insulate the guide ropes, because the guide ropes themselves, if they were just full length, would also become antenna, and they would start to interfere with the signal that's being broadcast. So the whole building has to be insulated from any interference. The towers themselves stand on bearings that are insulated. So you can see this is what they look like very recently. And then over here, you can get a bit of a close-up there. So that is an insulated bearing. So the whole weight of the tower is sitting on top of that concrete structure and that bearing. But the whole point, it has to be all electrically isolated. And those little nodules that I mentioned, if you go to the Droitwich Museum, they've got some in there. These brown ones, the guide ropes go around those. There's two sorts. There's these brown ones and there's the more cylindrical ones. But if you can just see the little photograph there, that's one of those is that little nodule there. And I noticed they were also on in the film when they were doing the tests, because even doing the tests, you didn't want the guide ropes to become part of the antenna. I mentioned that there were some fatalities when it was built. So over here, I'll just tell you the anatomy of the building, if you like. So this part here is the office block. And then there was, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to get that before. And then in the middle you have what was the transmitter hall. And then in the centre you had the other control centre, which was, there were two desks in there. And then you've got the sort of machine shop here, and then you've got the engines. So those big 4 engines you can see, they're all in there, and you can just see the chimneys that are on that end. And now today, the only part of this building that's left is from here onwards. All this has been demolished, unfortunately. It was a real shame. But it was all built, I don't know whether it was Portland stone, it looked like it was Portland stone, but they're all solid stone walls with a beautiful glass atrium over the top of a very Art Deco transmission hall. Funnily enough, it's very, very hard to find a photograph of the building. Somebody must have taken a picture, but I've gone to the library, I've gone to the Heritage Centre, I've talked to people that work there. And actually, when I spoke to Steve yesterday, Steve Gwilliam, he said, well, we engineers don't take the building, we're not interested in that, we're only interested in the bits inside. So he's got loads of photographs of dials and things, which probably you wouldn't be very interested in. But you can see what a grand building this was, and all of this facade here had the BBC coat of arms on it and the logo and all sorts of other fancy features. And parts of that have actually been preserved on the readapted building, which I'll hopefully show you a little bit later on. So this is a diagram of it. It's too small for you to read, but basically it's back to front from the way we were just looking. So the engine house in that picture, just the other was on the right-hand side. But you've got a boiler room. There were two 150-gallon tanks that used to provide the diesel for the generators. There was a battery room, because obviously you're relying on building up energy for maintaining a smooth flow of the broadcasting requirements. You've then got the machine room, which is where the ongoing work will be happening all the time. These transmitters needed a lot of maintenance, so there was a permanent team there. As far as I can gather, when the site was opened, there were about 50 people working there. During the war, it was getting on for 200 people working at the site, apparently. And then more recently, the site's been unmanned, but again, that's for a bit of a later story. It was two stories here, so we had all of the transmitter gear underneath, and then we had the actual operating and control desk that you just saw with the gentleman moving the valves around on the floor above, all looking down into this lovely atrium. Now, when the masts were built, they were built initially to broadcast long wave, and the call signal for long wave was 5XX, and that stayed the same right through to the 1980s and 90s before there were changes in broadcasting in wavelengths. And then in February, 17th of February 1935, the medium wave transmitter was then switched in. So prior to the building of the Droitwich transmitter, all of the transmissions in the UK were taking place by medium wave. They then experimented at Daventry, which was a big site, if some of you may remember that, next to the M6. So for a time, that was a big station, but that was only transmitting about 20 kilowatts. And then in comes this monster, which is going to be broadcasting at 150 kilowatts. So you can see we're on a whole new, different scale now. In terms of power, the diesel generators were generating 470 kilowatts, three-phase, 415 volt. So this is very much high-tension territory, and you wouldn't want to get near any of those things. If you had a pacemaker, you wouldn't stand a chance. I've included this. This will be available for some people, I think, to see afterwards, and I'm probably going to show this again, but I've got the abridged technical data here on the right, which I'm not going to read out because it'll take too long. But I think one thing I should have pointed out is that you'll notice halfway down it says feeds to the water-cooled valves. So these valves got incredibly hot, so they had to have a constant flow of water around them, and that's why they needed this 300-gallon reservoir that you saw being built right at the early stages. Now, this big reservoir was populated with fish, so it was absolutely full of goldfish, koi carp, and of course they were all left totally untouched, and they bred and they got bigger and bigger. And apparently the big entertainment was if you went down with some food and tapped on the railings, the fish would know it's feeding time, and they'd all come flocking in. So apparently all the families used to love that going down, and the canteen would make bread available to go and feed the fish. So you won't be surprised to know that many a house in Bromsgrove has got fish in it that may have had a heritage back to the tank, because obviously they were taking them out. And I had a lovely chat with Steve actually yesterday, because he was on duty when they completely drained the pond and took all the fish out. So, and they all went to a good home. I'm sure you're glad to know. Well, they all got sold. They all went to a fish retailer. So that was a nice story. I also thought, well, while the canteen are giving out bread, why don't I show you the menu? So there's a little menu here of what the canteen used to do, and you can get a main meal for 1 shilling and sixpence, which I think is 7.5p, isn't it? Something like that. Anyway, and a nice breakfast. So it would have been good fun. I think most establishments in those days would always have some sort of canteen facility, something else that isn't that common these days. So I just thought I'd show you a few pictures inside the transmitter hall, because I'm sure you'll be interested. It's all Art Deco, it's all, you know, really of its time, 1930s, all polished brass and some of the latest sort of formica being used, and lots of chrome, and all the dials beautifully presented and looked after. So the desk on the left-hand side is how it was built. In the 1960s, when a lot of the transmission changed, it went to a much smaller desk. As you can see, this great thing ended up being condensed into this. And of course, as you probably know, these days you'd be able to do all of that on that. So that's, so that's how everything goes micro, doesn't it, as we get more and more advanced. Now that desk, that very desk, is actually in the Droitwich Heritage Museum, so you can go and see that. I'm going to tell you how to do that at the end of the talk. So this is a nice shot from down on the ground floor, looking up at some of the balconies. This is the high tension machine room, so you can imagine this is very dangerous territory to be in. And then this is another picture taken from the upper floor, looking down at the motor generators which supply the currents to the filaments. There's the desk again. I won't take any more time on that. And another nice picture taken inside. All beautifully, immaculately presented and well maintained with real pride. The diesel generators, as I said, were a big feature. Now, they were only used in their own right for 4 years. Because after about 1941, even though it was, 1939 would be, just before the war, they brought power to the site, and from then on the diesel generators were used as backup. As I said, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to start them, or it did, so you shouldn't be surprised that those have all been replaced now, and that there are now much, much tinier but more powerful diesel generators on the site there providing the backup, still in the same location, I gather. There are also buildings around the site. I think when you have a little look, you'll notice that there's little cabinets and cubicles around, and the antenna themselves actually have their own transformer houses, which is what the buildings are at the bottom. And I think I've got a picture later on showing one of the main control antenna, which picks up some of the wires that come some of the cables that come down from the top of the masts. So it's not just about the main building. And one thing I haven't said yet is that you might be surprised to know that for every metre of tower going up, you need conductivity going down for the mast to work properly. So it was really important that they found a site where the ground conductivity was very good. Now, some of you who live in Droitwich, I'm sure you'll know the word witch. Droitwich means salt. We have very salty ground, albeit at quite a low depth. And these masts are at Wychbold, so again the word name salt is there. And running underneath the whole of this area is what's called a brine run, or a brine stream, which is about 90 metres down underground and has been causing subsidence and settlement for forever. And this brine run used to get close to the surface at a place called Stoke Works, which you probably know. And the reason it was called Stoke Works is because they used to process the brine to get the salt out, and there was a huge business there from that factory. And Romans used to get brine from it. There were Roman wells along this route. So it was well known when they were looking for a good site, not only that it was central, but they found a good ground conductivity. They actually knew that it was going to be quite saline around here. So that's why they picked it. So as I said, for every metre up, there's a metre of conductivity down. At the bottom of the mast, there is what's called, there's a copper shield, which I believe is something like 20 feet in diameter, so there's actually a big sheet of copper. And then radiating out from that sheet of copper, there are what are called copper radials that go right out to the edge of the site. So the whole of the ground is also behaving as part of the antenna. So it's a very, very clever site. You won't be surprised to know that in the past they have had trouble with people trying to steal the copper, which has had some big impacts, and Steve was able to tell me some nice little anecdotes about that. They're totally fearless, these people. They don't know the risks they were taking, but they managed to, the great thing, because the site was manned all the time, all those thefts were, if ever did happen, they were able to get the masts the transmitter back into action very, very quickly. So here's a little bit of a mental map of the site. So across the centre, you've got the building in that sort of cruciform with a hammerhead on it. You've got the oil storage tanks. You've got the water storage pond to the left. And then you've got these big underground feeder lines going to those centre buildings that I was talking to you about. And then you've got the radio masts themselves, masts 1 and 2. I think on this one, one is, I think 2 is A and 1 is B, I think, going back to front. But there we go. So we got into wartime. Obviously, the Masts had a big role to play in the war. They were obviously broadcasting a long way around, but they were taken over by the Ministry of Defence. So the site was manned by military police, and there was a new building built. Just to the bottom, it's the one that is. Have you ever noticed there's a big building on the A38 called used to be called Iguana? I think it's just changed name. That used to be the building that was built for the operations during the war, and there were about 150 people working from that, many of whom actually domiciled in Droitwich and Bromsgrove. So a lot of the guest houses obviously had some good trade from that. So it played a big role. The most notable that's often talked about is that they were used for giving covert messages to the French resistance, but they were also used for blocking radio signals when the Luftwaffe were coming in to bomb in the various sites. So there was a coordinated plan that the Ministry of Defence masterminded with the BBC, where they would switch transmitters in and out in sequence to completely confuse the enemy, so that essentially the aeroplanes wouldn't know where they were. So it's really played its part in the war. It had a very narrow escape in 1941 when a Junkers 88 it hadn't been shot down, I believe. I think it was just failing, and the pilots abandoned it, and they thought they'd left it on course to go out to the sea, but actually it came inland and it crashed just behind the masts, so it nearly took the masts out. So that's quite interesting. I'd love to see some details on that, so maybe my lovely friend Pat can help us find that. During the time that the aerials have been there, or the antenna, the transmitters have changed several times. So they changed even before the war, because they were always being upgraded, and that's what's happened during the war and after the war. And when we got in the 1950s, there was what was called the Copenhagen Frequency Plan, when all the frequency levels were re-agreed internationally. And so the station output increased to 400 kilowatts. So it's quite remarkable, isn't it? Using the same antenna, so the antenna themselves could probably cope with most, I would have thought. And then when we got into the 1960s, there was a complete rejig of how the station operated, and that's why the control equipment and everything was considerably downgraded. And that's how we ended up with this little desk. And of course, in the 1950s and 60s, we got the light program, then we had the third program, and then the home service. 1967, we had Radio 1 was emerging at that time. Radio 4 was still being broadcast on long wave. So this transmitter has been transmitting to all of us, particularly growing up. You know, I was born in 1960, so a lot of what was going on there was obviously very close to me as well. So what's happened to the hall now? The transmitter hall has been significantly scaled back. So what happened in the 1960s, they found that they didn't need as many men on site to do the operations, because there was far better communications coming back about how to, whether anything might be going wrong. You didn't need as many men on site. It probably was men then as well, unfortunately, sorry. But then the building itself, obviously part of it was redundant. So as you can see just to the left over here, where the gravel is there, that was where the transmitter hall and the office block was. And then this next picture, you can see this facade here, which has been created from the stonework from the actual front. So the original crest is all still up there, but it used to be over here somewhere. And they've mimicked the columns that used to be part of the entrance hall. So these days we would probably just have bricked it up, but so at least even in the 1980s when that was done, they still had the foresight to protect the front. Now Steve told me that the building itself is listed, but I wasn't sure about that, so because we're going to talk about listing a little bit later on. But so I can't confirm or deny whether it is or not, but certainly it was good to hear that they actually made an effort to protect the front of the building. Inside it's been significantly scaled down, so if you remember all that lovely polished brass and chrome and everything, and now we've got these panels which look really utilitarian, but they still work and we still get our radio signal. And that was taken last year, I believe, so the hall is still being used. Steve did tell me that they've preserved just over here, that it doesn't have a picture, they've actually preserved the balcony that used to run from the front of the building right through into this sort of central section. So that's good to know that is there. So I could just go on and on about technical things. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm trying. But I thought you might like to know a little bit about the social life that used to happen at the station. So I've told you that how many people were there. It had its own canteen, 50 people, 200 in the war, gradually going down to none. Apparently it does have manned people there now, which is lovely. So there was a social club which was set up shortly after the station was opened. They had inaugural dinners and things. I've got a nice menu there. You'll see they were starting with iced melon and mock turtle soup, fillets of sole, roast turkey. I haven't had any dinner yet. I'm really hungry. And this book is just a delight. I mean, I've got lost in it for over an hour because it's just looking like through my old family photographs, even though none of my family are in it. So this was the club diary for 1956. I've just picked it. You can see there's at least 20 or 30 events taking place in there, so they're very, very active. And of course, people could join from Droitwich as well and from Wychbold. It wasn't just, I think they had to have a link to the BBC staff. So it wasn't just anybody that could go and join it, but it was open to friends and family. I thought I'd include this one because it's quintessential English. We've got the cricket match. I can tell you that will be a match between two transmitter stations because they used to compete with each other. Lovely view there of the building and the lovely tree-lined route up to the front, so you can see it's a lovely scene. This is the women of the cricketers, I believe. So they were having their time at the same time. That's the tennis courts just behind, and I'm pretty sure that must be Upton Warren Church. That's just for Claire Greenwood, because she lives near there. So I thought I'd include that picture just for you. This is a picture of an open day. I think it's in 1937, so this is one of the first, isn't it? Yeah. And you can see a good old tug of war happening there, so lots of fun going on at the station. And I've included this one. The clue is in the top right-hand picture of the Archer, because this is the visit of the Archers to the station, which happened in 1952. And you'll see there, you've got Dan Archer standing there, and then you've got Walter Gabriel. Do you remember Walter Gabriel? Oh, yeah. And then we've got Doris Archer's there. It's amazing, isn't it? So I thought I'd just include that, because I think it's so lovely. And the fact that they came to the station. Now, there used to be, as I said, there was a social club, but I haven't actually pointed it out yet. I'll point it out in a little diagram in a few minutes. And it was a big timber structure, and apparently it was all lined with oak, and it felt like a brick building when you were inside it. In fact, those people who have seen pictures inside always think it was actually in the main building, but actually it was in a big timber building out in the grounds, and that's where all this activity happened. So the Archers there are standing on a little stage outside of the building there, possibly enacting a scene, because there is the author, E.J. Maid. Probably some of you here will know who the writer was for the Archers. I can't read that. But the Archer was there now. I thought I'd throw this into some nice 1930s and this is 1950s entertainment here. So you've got bowling for a pig. That sounds good, doesn't it? We've got the marquees all out. There's the building that I was talking about, out in the grounds. And that's it had a little courtyard in the middle. So it looks lovely, doesn't it? And the bit you're all going to be horrified at is when I show you the... I don't know what's happened to it. Has it gone? I'll just go back. I'll stay there. This is judging the best ankle competition. There you go. So they're all screened. And I knew that would go down well. Another nice shot here of people taking tea. This is the three-legged race you can see going on here. All really good stuff. I love it. I think I might have a... Oh, here we go. There's the picture again of the ankle. Actually, I've used the same picture, that's why. In fact, I seem to have duplicated some slides. Oh, there we go. This is a better picture. Look at that. Right, there we go. Now, in 1955, that would have been the 21st anniversary of the Masts, that's right, they had a cake made, and it had a sugar icing tower on it. Apparently that was all sugar. And a lot of the people here are either station managers or ran the social club. But I won't go into that. I don't know who they are, but I actually do know who they are, but I've never met them, obviously. And the really big event that sticks in most people's minds was in 1957 when the transmitter hall had an open day. So apparently the BBC at the time, funny enough, it's a bit like Groundhog Day, were really trying to encourage people to go into the telecoms industry because there was a shortage of skills. So funny enough, so we are there now as well, isn't it? And so they thought if we have an open day, a few people might come along and we might encourage some people to get interested. So before it had even opened, there were 160 people queuing to get in. And there were coaches arriving. All the roads around it were gridlocked, as you can see here, all the cars. Look at all these lovely Austins going there, some good cars. And by the end of the day, they'd had 13,000 people go through that site. Can you imagine? Can you imagine us, Bromsgrove Society, trying to manage 13,000 people? We were struggling with 240, weren't we? So what a wonderful thing. The BBC tried to do it again 2 or 3 times later, but I think the world was changing in the 60s, and they didn't get the turnout, but they still had 2,000 people. So when I was reading about it, I thought, well, that's still great, isn't it? I'd be pleased with 2,000. There was a 50-year anniversary, so that would have been in 1984, and that was the meal. So it started off with transmitter cocktail, receivers cornet, braised beef of the chef. That's not very nice, does it? And then there was a Wychbold celebration gâteau. Goodness knows what that was like. I bet it was very salty. And of course, as this letter says here, all good things must come to an end. And in 1988, sadly, because the station had been almost unmanned by then, the social club had declined, and the BBC weren't prepared to support it anymore, so it all came to an end. So it's really sad, I think, that because it obviously had a very big part to play in the local community. This is for Colin. Colin Butterworth, put your hand up. Colin Butterworth. Now, you were telling me the other day, because you didn't believe it, that your chemistry master at this very school used to tell you about the fact that he could hear signals coming out of his cooker. Well, apparently, it was absolutely true. In fact, you could even get it out of a drain pipe. And it's called the drain pipe effect. I'm not going to read this out, but in areas where there's lots of energy being generated, obviously to a wavelength and frequency, anything that's vertical or has got or is metallic will actually start to resonate, and it will start to act as an antenna. So he was dead on. So you can go away with some confidence now that you had some good education. So this is what the hall looks like now. So we've got, this is the central section, as I was explaining to you, if the mouse would just work. Where have you got a mouse? Oh, here it is. So that's the central part, which was originally that was the machine shop. So that was the transmitter hall, and that was the main building. And that's the facade that they've now reused some of the original materials for. And now the transmitter hall now sits in here, which is where the engines used to be. So that's how they do it now, and they've still got workshops, I think, through this central section here. Some of the key features to notice, you can see some of the lines. Those are the connections going out. So you can actually see them on an aerial photograph. This is the old reservoir here. You can just see it. I'm just going to zoom out a bit now. So the social club used to be here, and the tennis courts are in this area that's now overgrown. So the social club was right at the far end of the way, as far away from Worcester Road as you can think. And this is the building that was built during the war, and then afterwards was used for storage, and is now actually used for scenery, I think. It's actually used by a theatrical supplier. That's certainly what the previous company did anyway. So that's the site. As I said, it's a bit like a country park. It feels, when I look at it from out of my window, it looks lovely. I'm going to give a real call out here to a gentleman who we must remember. His name was John F. Phillips. He was one of the main engineers on the transmitter. He retired, actually. He was 90. He died last year. He was 90, I think he was 96. Died last year. And thanks to John, he was able to save at least some of the equipment that was actually being made redundant, including the operations desk. And as you would expect of a telecoms engineer, it all works. So he's got the whole thing set up so that you can actually do broadcasting and receiving from it. Sadly, now he's died, there is nobody there to operate it. So if there are any radio enthusiasts in the hall tonight, or if you know of anybody, Droitwich Heritage Centre is desperate to connect with somebody that might have the time to go in and relive John's work. It sounds like he was an amazing man. He was one of those very undersung gentlemen who just knew how to fix everything, and he was a big player behind the actual Droitwich Museum itself, getting that working. So I wish I'd met him. I think we've all said that. We wish we'd met him. So this is the Droitwich Museum, which you'll find is just in the centre of Droitwich. It's a beautiful half-timbered building. I don't think it's as old as it looks, but it's worth going to see. And the heritage, the Droitwich part, the transmitter part is within that building. So please do, if you get a chance, call into Droitwich and go and have a look and talk to Rebecca Butler, who will be delighted to talk to you. So this is my last slide. This is my reflection on a great life. This is the view from my office window. I love it. I just think it's fantastic. You can see what I mean about it looking like a parkland. A couple of things I haven't mentioned, which you will be interested in. Have you ever wondered why the lifts are stuck halfway up the mast? Have you ever gone past and thought, you probably didn't know they were the lifts, did you? So those lifts are winched up from the bottom. There's a winch house at the bottom. I think it was a picture I showed right earlier on at the bottom of the mast, where there was that big timber building. So all of the masts have got one of those at the bottom. The two big masts have got one of those at the bottom. And basically, it's a cable that goes right the way up to the top of the tower, over a pulley, comes down, then holds the lift. And what they used to find was, if they parked the lift at the top or the bottom, the cable would start to pick up the resonant frequency of the wind currents, and it would then start to catch the tower and short out, and it was actually disrupting the signal. So the engineers worked out the optimum position, and I can tell you that they are fixed at 550 feet above the ground, because that is the optimum site that stops the cables blowing around in the wind and catching on the masts. So there we go. So those masts are 90 years old in September. A lot of us know them because they're a great landmark. A lot of us know them because we don't know them, because they're broadcasting to us. The signals that come from there now are Radio 5 Live, so that's still broadcast from there. The shipping forecast goes from there. And how many of you are on Economy 7? Hands up. Ooh, that's probably good news for them, because the Economy 7 switchover happens because of a signal that comes from the masts at midnight, and then obviously comes back on at 7 o'clock. So please hang on to it, because the minute you guys stop doing it, then they'll say we don't need them anymore. Apparently they were going to try and switch out long wave this year, but because the smart meter rollout hasn't been as effective as they were hoping, their masts are still going to be broadcasting for a little while yet. So, and the other thing is they're probably not going to come down very quickly, because they are an asset in their own right. So the site owner, which is now Arqiva, who BBC sold off all of their telecoms operations, or their transmitter operations in the 1990s, I think it was. So Arqiva is an Australian company that owns it now. Obviously own a lot of transmission sites, but they are like gold dust at the moment for transmitting all sorts of things. So those masts will probably be around for a little while. I can tell you that there is an interest, though, in having them listed. And did I hear somebody cheer? That's good. And Joe, Pat and myself and our other colleagues on the Bromsgrove Executive have put our support behind a campaign to have them listed. There's been a letter sent already by Carl Dukes, I think his name is it Heritage England? Is that right? Historic England, that's right. Gone to Historic England, which we believe has been accepted, and I do know it has been accepted. I didn't tell you this because Droitwich have already had a consultation letter. So we now know that formal consultations are going on. I don't know whether we get one as well, because obviously we were supporting it. So Bromsgrove Society is going to be working with Droitwich Society, two history groups, both very passionate about the masts. As I said, they've got a double purpose. They're a landmark, but they're also part of our heritage for broadcasting. And I can't think, personally, of a better place to have some sort of national museum of broadcasting than here in Droitwich. Can you imagine? Well, here in Wychbold, rather. Yeah, got to say Wychbold, haven't we? Yeah, we're not saying Droitwich, it's Wychbold. They should be called the Wychbold Masts. So, my reflection is I've grown to love them. I know a little bit more about them than I did. I've shared with you what I've learned. It's a journey I'm sure I'm going to carry on learning more. Have any of you got any questions which I won't be able to answer? Thank you very much.